For over 2 years now, I have been on a campaign to expose this so-called preacher who calls himself a bishop, as well as some of his followers who call themselves his disciples. Some of them work as pastors under him, and he has sent them out to form their own churches to franchise his sect. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing who preys on vulnerable women and gullible men who choose to follow him. He has done many evil things to people, and I only have time to share a fraction of it today. My mother and I unknowingly joined a small Christian sect. Maybe I shouldn't call them a sect. They are too small to be called a sect. They are more like a cult. I was 16 at the time, and my father had just passed away. Being the only son of a stay-at-home mom, I dropped out of boarding school, and we moved back to my hometown in the east of my country to live with my mother's brother because we couldn't afford the rent of our apartment in the big city. When my mother and I moved back to my hometown, I enrolled at a local government school, which is free. The condition of the schools is poor. The teachers barely show up to classes. Most students are from equally underprivileged backgrounds and resort to criminal activities like gang-related stuff, stealing, and coastmongering, which is normally street vending, because those were the only options they had. Thanks to my late dad for working hard to make sure that I went to a good school when he was still alive, I had a good foundation. Instead of joining my friends to do bad things, I became a street vendor along with my mom. I tried to help her as much as I could when I came back from school early so we could make enough money and save to move out of my uncle's house and get a place of our own. One Sunday, my uncle took us to his church. We have always been Catholics, but this church was more of a Pentecostal church with a certain cultish flavor, with a leader who thinks he's Jesus. His followers think he's the second coming of Christ. They truly believe that he is the second coming of Christ, and they believe that in order to go to heaven, you have to attend this church. His message is tailored to attract the poor and destitute. He is also a wealthy man and is not afraid to show it. By the type of cars he drives and the mansion he lives in, he is a very shrewd businessman, and most of his money is invested in his church. Interwoven with the congregation, I will explain that later. His wealth further solidified to his followers that he is the chosen one. He is very intelligent and a master manipulator. When he speaks from the pulpit, it is almost like his message is tailor-made for each member of his congregation, if that makes sense. I was still a young man and I was captivated by him, and so was my mom. My uncle and his family have been attending the church for a few years now before we joined, and he wouldn't stop going on about how great the man is. Who could argue against him? The first time my mom and I met the bishop, he offered to give us a small amount of money to start a business based on a specific arrangement where he owns the business. My mom works for him, and she pays him a percentage every week. Sounds good, right? Well, this business belongs to him, and he could take it any time we misbehave. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, that really changed our lives overnight. So there it was. He replicated such business practices among his congregation, mostly underprivileged, and they were paying him dividends every week. Now imagine replicating such brilliance among a congregation of 3,000 to 5,000 loyalists. He also has 13 pastors under him known as his disciples. He trained them, and they assist him in consulting the members and providing them with financial advice. He also has a group of young men who act as his soldiers, his enforcers, to make sure that everybody is in line. He took a liking to me during subsequent meetings with him that I attended with my mom. On one of those meetings, my mom came to see him. We had to wait in line for about 3 hours before it was our turn. I waited in another room while he met my mom privately. After their meeting, when he walked out of the door with my mom, he started asking me so many questions. He thought I was smart and invited me to come back another day to be one of his personal assistants, cleaning up his office and recording names of guests who come to see him. My mother thanked him for giving me that opportunity. In less than 3 months of attending that church, we were able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment and some disposable income, and we had nothing but gratitude for the bishop. The first day I worked for him, during his counseling session, I noticed that most of the people there to see him were women, and most of the women were married. Even on that very first day of the job, I suspected that he was intimate with at least 3 of the women, and come to find out, my suspicions were true. I was old enough to know what it sounds like when 2 people are being intimate. My office is in between his office and the waiting area, so the people on the other side wouldn't hear a thing. The noise was so faint that I could barely hear them, so I wouldn't expect anybody who wasn't in the same room as me to be able to hear it. I knew one of those women. I have seen her several times with her husband. She had 2 daughters, one of whom I had a crush on. At that age, my sense of morality tells me that there was something wrong with what the bishop was doing. But somehow, because it was him, it must be the right thing. How could a man that righteous be wrong? How could a man that charismatic be wrong? Maybe that's what God told him to do. I used to tell myself all this, and I'm certain all these women he was having his way with thought the same. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. For example, one Wednesday, I came back from school early to attend service, because I was scheduled to be one of the ushers that day. After he finished preaching, he sat at his so-called throne on the altar and waved me over. When I came over to the altar next to his seat, he whispered in my ear to quietly approach a girl sitting in a particular location among his congregation and pass her a note. This girl was only 3 years younger than me. I knew her age because her brother goes to the same school as me. After the service that evening, when everyone had left, I was closing things up with some of my church members. I saw the girl going into his office. I could only imagine what they were doing. Looking back to my mindset back then, I thought she was lucky that he made time for her, and I'm sad to say that she became one of his regulars. I could go on and on about similar incidents. After graduating high school, my mom had enough money to send me off to college. About 2 semesters later, when I came back from college during the holidays, it was clear to me that my mom was also having an affair with the bishop. My time away at college had broken the spell that the bishop had on me because I could see things very clearly. He was having an affair with a lot of his female parishioners, some of whom were married. The strange part is that some of their husbands might have known, but still kept silent. That just showed how influential he was in their lives. They saw him as their Messiah, in charge of their faith and financial well-being. Most of the church members who worked for him made enough money to get by, but not enough to become wealthy. He kept them on a tight leash, so when they fell out of line, he would send one of his boys to manhandle them. Around here, the police are a joke. They can easily be bribed by powerful men, and you could get them to arrest people if you had enough money. During that summer break, I thought he was leading us astray, but I struggled with that internally, because without him, I would be living on the street and eating breadcrumbs. Without him, my mom wouldn't be able to afford her place. She's barely getting by, but she's managing, and as much as my conscience bothers me, he's still the golden goose and a father figure to me. During that summer holiday, I was serving as an usher in the church that evening, and as ushers, we also served as security. As the service was going on, I noticed a man with a Mercedes heading towards the entrance of the church. He looked really angry. When he entered the church, he broke the celestial ambiance by yelling profanity at the bishop who was sitting at the pulpit. He was accusing the bishop of stealing his wife and daughters. It was extremely embarrassing. We, including myself and 6 other men, who were serving as ushers and security, managed to capture the man before he made his way a few feet into the church. Not without a struggle and some non-life-threatening injuries suffered by some of my security colleagues. We dragged him to the side of the building and proceeded to beat him. Although I wasn't involved in the beating, I stood back and did nothing to stop it. I didn't know why, but I pulled out my phone and started recording the beating. At that time, my adrenaline was boiling, so I didn't have time to understand why he was doing what he was doing or if what he was saying was true. Why was he calling the bishop a false prophet? Why was he saying that he stole his wife and daughters? To me, at the time, we saw him as a demonically possessed man who had just knifed one of our church members and insulted our bishop. The security were almost trying to kill him. Somehow the police arrived, and the man was taken into custody and sent to the police station after receiving a significant beating from the ushers and security. When the police took him away, I felt really sorry for him because he was badly beaten. The worst part of it was that I knew the man. He drove a red Lexus with his wife and had 3 daughters and 2 sons. Up until recently, he was doing really well. They always looked happy and everyone envied them. What on God's earth could have driven him to this madness? He was always smiling and quick to evangelize about how great the bishop was. That night I couldn't sleep. I told my mom what happened, and she dismissed the man as a sinner and a lunatic who was possessed with lust and had forgotten who made him who he is. I was stunned by the lack of compassion and how far from reality my mom had become, and her ability to justify every allegation that I brought against him. I couldn't help but look introspectively at how far off we were from reality. The following day, I began to inquire about the story of the man. When I started asking questions, I later found out that a small group of members were not entirely on board with what the bishop was doing, but they remained silent. I heard about how members were forced to pay high percentages of their income to the bishop. Some husbands even went as far as offering their wives and daughters to some of his disciples or security guards to make up for things. One of the most disturbing parts of it is that most of the women are happy to go along with it. They are so willing to share this man among his disciples and security. It's like a criminal organization. From my conversation with my mom, I understand that she didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They are willing to share him and his disciples, even with their daughters. Maybe someone more knowledgeable about the psychology of human beings could explain that to me. That brings me back to the story of the man who was badly beaten and lost his wife and 3 daughters. The story goes that the bishop told the man to give him his wife. I'm not sure what the man did or if it was some sort of punishment, but not only did the bishop marry the man's wife, the wife also went along with it and disowned her husband for going against it. And get this, not only did the bishop marry the mother, he also married the man's 3 daughters. The mother and daughters wouldn't even speak to their father anymore. Of course, I'm leaving out a lot more details from this story, but I'm trying to convey it without making this a 1,000-page writing. The man got so frustrated that he went insane, and who could blame him? So after the mother abandoned her husband and sons and took her daughter to marry the bishop, she now lives with the bishop and his other wives, along with his daughters. Now, the problem all started when the man in custody of the police passed away. I'm not sure whether he received any medical attention after the beating they gave him, or if he received additional beating at the police station. I am not sure whether it was from the beating, or if the police gave him more beating of their own. It really made me sick. I became disenchanted with the whole thing. I felt bad for the poor man, because I felt like nobody could tell his story. Nobody would give him a voice. Nobody would speak for him. I took it upon myself to do it for him, knowing that I would jeopardize my family's livelihood, my safety, and the safety of my mother and my extended family members. I took the initiative to write a story about the man on social media and posted the video of how he was beaten and taken to the station. It went viral and people started talking. I founded a group along with some other people, and we started protesting in front of the church every service, much to my mother's dismay. She was told to disown me, which she refused, and her business was taken away from her. My mother hated me for it, but I continued to protest. We started with just 25 of us, and grew to 200 within a month, as we continued our campaign to expose the bishop, his disciples, and henchmen. Some members started defecting, and the publicity put pressure on the police to investigate. Polygamy is legal in my country, but murder is not. Our campaign gained more publicity, and the federal government began paying attention and investigating the local police. They had no choice but to shut down the church. The bishop, his henchmen, and his disciples were so occupied defending themselves and their very existence that they left my mother and her business alone. Although I was part of the group that started the protest, many more church members came out and started exposing him. More passionate people took over, and I became a bystander. The last time I heard the church was shut down, However, my friend told me that they started back up again and went underground. They relocated, and some of the disciples started their own franchise, spreading themselves out to avoid being easily shut down. In this country, it's easy to get away with something like that, and evil is still allowed to endure. Beware of false prophets. I verified that this story took place somewhere in West Africa, specifically in Southeast Nigeria, but it could very well happen anywhere in the world. You don't need to travel around the world to notice that the poorer the country, the more religious it tends to be. There is a strong relationship between a country's socioeconomic status and the religiosity of its residents. Even in Western countries, it is easy for people to fall into groupthink. When a person underprivileged or poorly educated, as Trump would say, it is easy for a charismatic figure to influence them. In the United States, why are the most underprivileged communities often the most religious? Perhaps it's because they feel they have tried everything, and when they find a group or a charismatic leader who claims to have all the answers and allows them to stop thinking, they stop asking questions and do whatever the leader says. Some of us are old enough to remember Jamestown in 1978, and even Heaven's Gate in 1997, as well as many other similar incidents. On an anthropological level, humans have been wired to be influenced by religion, and all charismatic figures, because during our evolution, we feel safer in a group with a strong leader. During times of war or conflict, we are more successful when we join a group and believe in a leader that motivates us and guides us out of chaos. So even now, when we feel vulnerable and have tried everything with no success, our brains resort back to that caveman time, and we look for groups with charismatic leaders. We form personality cults around that person, and when the person says the right things and tells us what to do, we become lazy and allow them to influence our decisions. The reason why the United States is the greatest country economically and militarily is because of free thinking. Every once in a while you need some motivation. You need to listen to a motivational speech. But don't become too lazy and allow yourself to be controlled by groupthink and personality cults. Because when they think for you, they can control you. Most of these charismatic leaders are selfish and predatory. Please let me know what you think about this story. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Check it out.